What's happening, folks? Back with another reaction, back with an all-time trance classic from the late 90s. And it's another remix of a tune I've reacted to two different versions of in the last few years, which is to say we're going to listen to the Paul van Dyk remix of 1998 by Binary Finary. I did already react to the classic mix a couple years ago, and on the same day I reacted to the Goriella remix, or Goriella, I never knew, I think it's Goriella. Anyway, of 1999, which is basically the same tune, but that remix and another one came out a year later, so they changed the name of the tune from 1998 to 1999. But yes, my preference, as I think I said in that earlier reaction to the classic mix, was always that the classic mix was the more interesting one because it's very fast, it's a bit psychedelic, but also very acid saturated and melodic and in a way progressive. So yeah, it's like hard trance, psychedelic trance, and melodic or progressive trance all in one. And even though the tempo is such that it's not easy to mix with other trance tunes from the time just because it's so much faster, as I said, I think it's the most interesting mix. And then the Goriella remix from a year later is fantastic in a more epic, like hands up in the air, late 90s trance sort of way. But there's no denying, for those of you who, like me, went to trance parties in the last couple years of the 90s, that the Paul van Dyk remix was the preferred one. It's the one so many DJs would use. And going to Southern California trance parties, as I did, playing in a few of them, I remember that there were a number of other DJs in the LA scene who used this as like a go-to record. And I say this sleeve, as you can see, is from a different record. I got the 1998 record on the Belgian label Ground Level, which I had long thought was like the first issue of 1998, but I don't think it was. I remember people commented that there was one that had been released previous. But yes, when I got this record, it was in a generic black sleeve, which over the years just got damaged, or there was a split in the bottom and it just wasn't in the greatest condition. So I bought a different record on Discogs in the 2000s at some time, and the person who sold me that record included this as a promo, as a complimentary record in the same package. So because this is a nice sturdy outer sleeve, I swapped it out, and so Binary Finary's 1998 is in here, hence the DJ tool of just using a Sharpie to write it on so that I wouldn't get confused. But yes, as I said, the Paul van Dyk remix, it was caned, as they say, by many trance DJs at the time. So if you went to a trance party in the LA area in 98 or 99, maybe even 2000, there was a good chance at some point over the course of the evening you might hear this. And I do remember at least once, maybe a couple times, hearing more than one DJ play it in the same night, which maybe on a larger meta-analysis isn't ideal because it's like the people at the party, it's like, whoa, we already heard someone use this. But from a DJ's point of view, I get it. Like, you have it in mind, you want to use a record, and you don't know what other DJs are going to be playing on the same night, so it's like, you could alter your set. But if you really had it in mind that you wanted to play it and mix into it in a certain way, mix out of it in a certain way, then I get it. You just go ahead and use it anyway, even though it had already been played. Nevertheless, it is an all-time classic, and even if I think the classic mix is more interesting in terms of being a hybrid genre sort of trance track, this one is very, very good, and I like the way it unpacks the main melody, so let's give it a listen. This is Paul van Dyk and his remix of Binary Finary's classic late 90s trance tune, 1998. Wow. One moment, please. I will start it over. Okay. My speaker is finicky. a DJ mixing into this, that kind of ambient sonic glare, that's when you hear like, oh, they're mixing into 1998. They're mixing into the Paul van Dyk version. The way the kick cuts out. A structure quite similar to the classic mix, even if different in certain ways. Some mileage. can notice here, and in the first, minute and a half of the tune, the kick and bass line have a really nice sound to them. The kick-bass combo here is quite good. Very DJ friendly, this outro. She's off. Another tune where you can use it as an opener. You could have it in the middle of your set. You could use it as a closer. And I do remember, at least on mixtapes, I'm less certain about DJ sets at parties, but on mixtapes, I think there were at least a couple trance DJs back in the day in the LA scene, which again, I had tapes from a number of different DJs, but there were a few DJs that were playing at the parties that I was going to and eventually played at myself that I had multiple tapes from them, and I think in a couple cases, this was the last track on one of the sides, because it really is like it's so epic, it's so uplifting. Where do you go after that? You can definitely, use it in the middle of a set, like, practically, like, there's a long intro before it gets into the big, emotional section of the track, and there's a nice multi-section outro, which gives a lot of mixing out opportunities. But it is, like, the kind of thing where, the energy of a set, like, I have different ideas about how you put a set together. You can have a set where everything kind of has the same vibe and atmosphere, and so you're just keeping this level going. There's sets where you kind of start slower or more low-key, and you just build and build and build. Then there's a set where you build up and you have a peak in the middle in terms of energy and intensity, and then you kind of ratchet it back down on your way back out. But again, a tune like this, it's so epic that when it comes to like a melodic, uplifting trance set, there's not a whole lot of tunes that can follow this and hit the way they're supposed to, because people are still kind of thinking about this tune. So yeah, it's a great set closer, I would say. Again, I absolutely love it. I think it's brilliant, even if historically, like back in 1998 and 1999, and like late 99, early 2000s when I began playing parties myself, I was sort of like, everyone's playing this one, so I want to play either the classic trance mix, which again, it's faster, it's a bit like, it's a bit crazier, or I want to play the Goriella remix, which is equally epic as this, it just has a different sound to it. So yeah, I kind of steered away from this one at parties and, the mixtape that I put out back then, the official mixtape I had, it's more like driving hard trance, acid trance, and hard house, so this wouldn't have fit anyway. But yeah, I stayed away from this remix in my own sets because I felt like it's what everyone else is doing and I'm trying to, cut a slightly different path here. So that wasn't a knock on this remix, but I played it less. Now, many, many years later, I absolutely get why this was the one people were playing, because it's brilliantly remixed. So shout out to Paul van Dyk, but yes, it's just an all-time classic. Shout out to Binary Finary. Let me know what you think of this one. I'll see you next time. Peace.